Welcome to the Dairy News and Views podcast, a production of the Iowa State University Extension and Outreach Dairy Team. Our podcast covers current educational, research, and industry tools available for your operation to manage healthy cows and calves while producing the highest quality dairy products.
Thanks for joining us today on Dairy News and Views from the Iowa State University Dairy Team. I'm Fred Hall, Northwest Iowa Dairy Field Specialist, and I'm here today with my dairy colleague, Jen Bentley, Northeast Iowa Dairy Field Specialist, as we discuss today's topic with our guest, Joel Zook, talking about ways to save energy on the farm. Welcome back to the podcast, Jen.
Well, it's great to be back here, Fred, and I'm looking forward to visiting with Joel.
Welcome to our podcast, Joel.
Great. Yeah, thanks for having me here.
Joel, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah. Well, I work for the Winneshiek Energy District, which is a small nonprofit based here in Decorah, Iowa, up in the northeast corner of the state. And we do a lot of work with renewable energy and energy efficiency, and with the basic thought of being able to save or produce our own energy locally is a way to keep money in our local economies. So I work with homeowners and businesses and farmers as well.
I know you've been on some of our road shows with the Iowa Dairy Days here up in Northeast and in talking with producers on dairy farm audits. What is the first thing you recommend to producers that you would offer them as the best return on their energy savings?
Well, as far as, your biggest bang for your buck, your quickest payback thing, I'm always looking at lighting. LED lighting has just dropped in cost tons over the years, and there's still a lot of non-LED lights out there. So lighting is a huge opportunity for all farms and dairies especially, because the lights are on so many hours a day. So freestall barns, parlor, those lights are on a lot, and the payback can be very, very good on replacing those lighting.
Joel, do you have an example of a farm making changes to LED and what those cost savings might look like?
Sure. Yeah. And every farm is going to be a little bit different, but a fairly common practice is that a lot of freestall barns will have a 400 watt middle halide, so the big gym lights. And you can replace those with LEDs, kind of in a one-for-one replacement that makes installation very easy, that use half the energy, so only 200 watts. And, if those are running 18 hours a day in your barn, that's going to save, depending on your electricity prices, about $180, $200 a year. And you'd expect less than a 2-year payback on that investment. And so the savings can be really big. If you've got 40 fixtures in your farm, you're talking about $7,500, $8,000 a year in electric savings. And so that is a hugely impactful upgrade that a lot of farms can make.
Using electricity and power, it's a complex topic, especially when we get into all the moving parts it takes to move milk from cow to the bulk tank. Walk us through that equipment and where there might be some energy savings that producers should consider.
Yeah, Fred, that's a great question. On a dairy farm, a lot of energy is going into refrigeration, cooling that milk down and keeping it cool. And so on most farms, there is some sort of a plate cooler that's using well water to cool down that water as it enters the bulk tank. And so I would say that probably almost every dairy farm I've been to has one, but of course, if you didn't, if you were a smaller operation for some reason didn't have one, that's obviously something to look into. And there is cost share available for help funding those through the NRCS EQIP program. Furthermore, a lot of things that is a fairly common upgrade that I will recommend is installing a variable speed drive controller on the milk transfer pump. And that allows the water to go through the plate cooler more slowly and extract more heat, which is just going to save again on your refrigeration costs. You can figure that in a regular plate cooler, you can drop your milk down to 70, 75 degrees from the approximately 100 degrees it is coming out of the cow. And with a variable speed drive on there, you can drop that down to 5 or 10 degrees of your well water temperature. So increased savings is there, and you get a little bit of savings on the motor itself. Beyond that, a lot of times people are also looking at a refrigeration heat recovery unit. Sometimes they call those a free heater, or there's a couple different brand names out there. But that's taking that heat that is waste heat from your compressor and running it through a water tank and heating up your water. It's sort of preheating it before it gets to your water heater. So that's great. It saves a little bit of energy on your compressors. Your compressors have to run less. But the big benefit in terms of measurable savings is that you're preheating that well water from 55 degrees up to 120, 140, and then your regular water heater will take it up the rest of the way to 160 or 180. So that's a really good savings as well. What else on the milk cooling side and the milk recovery side? There is opportunity, especially for larger dairies, putting a variable speed drive on the vacuum pump. And then maybe last of all is looking at, do you have a scroll compressor, or do you have an old reciprocating compressor on your milk cooling system? All of those kind of work together. It's sort of I've got a spreadsheet that kind of works them all together and how they interact to estimate those savings. And there is cost share available for each of those practices through the EQIP program, which we'll talk about more.
And as a follow-up to that question, Joel, do you find some of those practices that you mentioned, if somebody was going to build a completely new parlor system, are those kind of just standard now versus upgrading later, as far as the variable speed and those types of things? Are those already implemented in a new facility?
Well, I would think so. It would make sense to be building those in from the get-go. And like a compressor, for example, I don't think anyone's putting in the older type compressors anymore. It oftentimes doesn't make sense to change them out kind of until the end of their lifespan, but it's not a huge dollar upgrade to buy the more efficient things to start out with. It depends on, I think, both on new and on replacement, on the size of the dairy and the number of cows that you've got coming through there, as to whether or not that marginal cost of the next thing is worthwhile. But I imagine most new dairies going in are going to be using all of those practices.
And so we kind of talked about, moving the milk from the cow to the bulk tank, but obviously there's other areas on the farm that we can be saving energy. What about grain drying or space heating, any of those types of things? Are there opportunities there?
Yep, there absolutely are. And those are not even specific to dairy. So if we have any non-dairy listeners on there, a lot of times when I do an energy audit at our farm, I want to look at all of the energy use that's going into the farm. So there's certainly a priority, and a lot of times on a dairy, that lighting and the milk system is going to be where I'm going to focus on. But I also just want to include, if there's any other heated spaces in the barn, or, a lot of times it's a machine shop that's heated or heated poorly. And so is there an opportunity to upgrade the heating equipment there, or upgrade the insulation, or just make that building more airtight? And then grain drying as well, as, I get a lot of folks requesting an energy audit really for the purposes of looking at upgrading their grain dryer and unlocking some of the cost share that can come with those reports. You can drop, again, it all depends on your current setup, but a lot of times when I'm doing energy audits for folks that have older dryers, they're looking at saving 20% or more of their LP usage. And that can be a lot. And so even though the grain dryer upgrades are very expensive, people are looking at paybacks of 5 to 10 years. And a lot of times are wanting to upgrade their grain dryers, not only for energy savings, dollar savings, but to be able to just run their system more efficiently and maybe able to get to sleep at night during harvest.
Yeah, and I would say that probably depends on the year too. I mean, some years you're going to have to dry more than others, and that could add up pretty quickly.
Yeah, it is, of course, a very variable practice, and we'll get a surge, I think, a lot of times after a wet year, where people say, well, it's probably not going to be that wet again next year, but I don't ever want to do this year over.
Solar seems to be a buzzword in agriculture lately. What input do you have for someone looking into solar? What might the electric utility policies be for producers installing it on their operation?
Well, it's something that you should certainly consider. The price of solar has come down a lot in recent years, and a lot of farms are putting it up and seeing how that benefits them. The biggest question is, what is your utility going to pay you for energy that you sell back to them? A lot of utilities, at least some, will let you get a credit, a full retail value for any energy that you export back to them. But some will only pay you a fraction of that, which is equal to their wholesale costs. So I think that's the biggest question is, are you getting a full value for energy that you sell back to the utility? or are you only getting a little bit of money? And so in the first case, if you are getting that full value, you can size generally to meet your farm's annual needs, and you'll produce a little extra some months and use a little more in other months, and that balances out for the year, and you can get your utility bill almost paid for, except for your hookup charge. With other utilities, either because your system is too big or they don't have a really great solar policy for their customers owning solar, they might be only giving 2 or 3 cents if you sell energy back to them. So, and that's really not enough to make that economical. So you want to look at how you can use that energy and never sell it back, or at least making sure that you're using up 80-90% of the energy you produce. So a lot of bigger farms can put up a relatively small solar system and size it to meet their needs that they're doing, in the middle of the day, and that maybe offsets 20% of their annual energy use and still gets a very good payback. So talking with a solar installer is a good way to know that, especially if you can talk to one locally around you. They're going to know better what your utility solar policies are. And it's a good time to be looking into it because tax credits are a full 26% of system costs through the end of next year. And then they go down to 22% after that.
Yeah, I've really seen, just driving across the landscape of Winneshiek County, I've really seen an increase in the use of solar. So just kind of curious what the amount of solar is needed to produce energy. Do you have a number?
Yeah, well, I'll try to answer this in a way doesn't get too technical, but you can assume that 2 or 3 panels is about 1 kilowatt of solar. The panels all come in different sizes depending on the manufacturer. But if we talk about a kilowatt, that's their peak output. That's sort of an apples to apples comparison. You can assume that you can get about 1,300 kilowatt hours, so 1,300 kilowatt hours per kilowatt of solar per year. So if you know how many kilowatt hours you use in a year, you can divide it by 1,300 and get an approximate look at how much solar you might need to meet 100% of your needs. But again, you want to look at what your utilities policy are as far as that buyback portion to know if you're sizing to meet 100% or if you're going to try to size to meet your just sort of peak usage. And when I do an energy audit, I give people some basic solar information just so that they're thinking about that into their plans.
And that was my next question, Joel. How does a producer go about conducting a dairy energy audit, either in Winneshiek County, or let's say they're in a different county here in Iowa? What do they do?
Sure. Well, they can always give us a call at the Winneshiek Energy District. You can look us up at energydistrict.org, and maybe we can share my contact information in the show notes. But the other place to start is your NRCS office. So start at your Soil Conservation District office. The NRCS team there will help you through the energy audit process, and you can decide a little bit on how fast you want to move. There is actually cost share for the energy audit itself. If you don't mind waiting kind of the time it takes to apply for cost share on the audit, getting approved for that, doing the audit, and then you have to make a separate application for get cost share for the actual equipment, whether you need a grain dryer or lighting or a milk pump. And so got plenty of people coming through that are going that route. Sometimes I've got people who are in a hurry and they would rather not apply for cost share because they're looking at getting a grain dryer this year and they pay kind of full out of pocket for the energy cost so that they can get in time for the fall application. So EQIP deadline is generally in mid-October. So now is a great time to be talking to your NRCS office while you're not busy with the fall harvest and charting that course out. They'll help you decide if you want to do an energy audit now or if you want to apply for cost share and do it a little bit later. And you do need an energy audit to apply. This is maybe your next question, but you need an energy audit to apply for EQIP on actual practices or to apply for REAP. REAP is a grant that can be used for energy efficiency or renewable energy. EQIP is run through the NRCS office and it is only for energy efficiency. But the cost share on EQIP is really good for lighting, for dairy practices, for building insulation and heating, and for grain drying. And people might know EQIP. That's the same program that has cost share for cover crops or terraces or other practices, but they do have an on-farm energy initiative, which is very good.
A lot of producers are pretty well versed with EQIP and REAP both, but we get questions on other funding opportunities. Are there other funding sources available to producers who are looking to improve their energy efficiency?
Well, REAP and EQIP are the two big ones on the energy efficiency side. And then, of course, the major incentive for solar or any type of renewable energy is the tax credits. So the federal tax credits, as I mentioned, are 26% right now and set to decline a little bit over years. And that is the big sources. I mean, I'm sure there's smaller grants out there that you could chase, but a lot of times people are looking at how they can use EQIP for energy efficiency practices, looking at tax incentives for solar. And then it's very likely that your utility does have some rebates for lighting or other energy efficiency practices. And they can be paired, of course, with EQIP that make things pretty good. They're not what they used to be. They've decreased in recent years, but they're worth applying for if you're doing the project already.
And Fred, I would think, just in visiting with producers as margins get tighter and tighter, anything that we can do on the farm to save some dollars, this seems like a good practice to look into. And from lights to milking equipment, it all seems like those are going to be dollars back in producers' pockets that they can, invest somewhere else on their dairy or just help with their overall profitability.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest things I just want to, is to get farmers and all business owners into thinking of that, energy costs are not fixed costs, right? They're a little bit trickier than some other of your costs that you can move around. But if your energy bills are high, there's probably potential for savings, and there's things you can do, investments that you can make with a relatively quick payback that can lower your ongoing costs.
Yeah, I think for producers, it kind of has to start with that energy audit. Because the old saying, you don't know what you don't know. Well, until you've identified where the problem is, it really is difficult to say, well, let's improve here or there. So, Joel, Jen, it was a pleasure getting to visit with you today on energy saving practices and resources for producers. We hope this information can help dairy producers make changes on the farm that are positive for both the dairy and their pocketbooks. Any last thoughts or comments you'd like to add, Joel?
No, I don't think so. Thanks for having me today, Jen and Fred. It was great talking with you.
Everybody, thanks for joining us today, and we're looking forward to visiting with you on the next Dairy News and Views from Iowa State.
This institution is an equal opportunity provider. For the full non-discrimination statement or combination inquiries, go to www.extension.iastate.edu/diversity/ext.